Welcome back to If This Is True. I'm Bernie, and today we're talking about being pushed unwillingly, kicking and shouting, back to the Dark Ages. Today is a big one. It's up there with some of the biggest cons in human history, and it's going to blow your mind. Today's government policy slapdown is batteries. Don't groan. You need this ammunition in order to fight back, because we have to fight back now to the bullshit you're being fed. Pay attention. It's going to be fun. Let's get chemical. Now, the net zero fanatics, the government, and even the NGOs keep telling you that battery storage will be the answer to all of our renewable energy needs. It's a miracle solution to power all of our demands forever. But today, as you're about to learn, that's a total lie. See, we're being told that battery storage will help the UK transition smoothly to renewable energy by 2030 or 2050, whatever it is the papers are reporting today. But the truth is, we're not even close to having the technology or the resources to meet that goal, at least not without an enormous economic sacrifice from, you. So pay close attention now, because to store just 1 day's worth of energy for the entire UK would cost over £400 billion with our current battery technology, which, by the way, isn't getting better. That's for one single day. And there are so many technological limitations, it's literally difficult to even know where to start. But I am going to start with the science bit. Batteries, even this little AA one here, require chemical elements. Remember those on the periodic table? Because out of the 118 elements on that table, very few can be used for large-scale battery storage. See, 39 of those elements are radioactive and entirely unsuitable. 23 elements like platinum and other rare earth metals are too scarce or too expensive to use in something as monumental as energy storage for an entire country. And we can't use cadmium or mercury because they're toxic, so that'd kill us. And that leaves us again with that narrow selection of materials, mostly lithium, cobalt and nickel. Now, if you followed the rare earth mining video, you can watch it here. Have a look at how complicated that is. I love mining. It's brilliant. Even if we could secure enough of those materials, which we definitely can't, we're also faced with massive manufacturing challenges in the UK. Because building batteries on a large scale is not only energy intensive, using fossil fuels, it also requires complex equipment that has to be shipped all around the world before reaching us, kicking out loads of CO2 that we're apparently trying to stop. It would be like trying to build all our cars from scratch in a single factory with every single part having to be imported. The inefficiencies are enormous. And here's a fun fact for you, because even if Tesla's gigafactory ramped up production to 500 times, it would still take 500 years to manufacture enough power for the US for 1 day. Right? So the UK, to even contemplate this within 7 years, is practically impossible. There's no manufacturing facility on Earth large enough to produce the amount of battery power required for not only the UK for 1 day, but imagine 200 countries all trying to do the same thing at the same time. Are you getting the picture yet? To understand the scale of manufacturing, you're going to have to suspend your disbelief for a minute. So, let's pretend we could manufacture them all, right? I know we can't, but let's pretend we could. Let's pretend we've turned the Isle of Man into a massive battery factory. Really sorry about that, Isle of Man. You're looking at an investment of 400 billion for 1 day just to store it. Imagine the cost estimate of turning the Isle of Man into a factory to produce them. Yet our government says that's entirely possible. Yet they're not explaining any of the costs to you at all. They're just hoping that you're not going to think about it, like I'm asking you to do now. See, the only way to achieve anything like that kind of manufacturing capability is through global banks and massive corporations loaning us the money. And even they'll run out of other people's funds, let alone their own, before there's a payback. And where would that payback even come from? That'd be you in your bills. Remember all that free energy, the free sun, the free wind? It's a gigantic con. It'll never be free. And if we go down this road, the UK risks becoming economically dependent and locked into global banks and corporations. And once that dependency is locked in, those entities will have almost complete control over our future energy policies, all our policies, and dictating the future of our country. Because economic dependence on external forces is the quickest way to erode national sovereignty. And we're doing all of this, all of it, while sat on at least 200 years of our own natural energy in the form of oil and gas. And that's before I even mentioned fracking. And there's no point having a nervous breakdown that I mentioned fracking, because if you want to learn about seismic activity from stupid projects, watch my video on carbon capture, because that's really stupid. They told us renewable energy would make us self-sufficient, no longer at the mercy of enemies like Russia. Well, give me Russia any day over global corporations and banks. Now, we know that battery production requires huge amounts of rare earth metals and materials. We already know, because we've discussed it before, that global mining will have to increase by 2,000% in the next 7 years just to cover existing infrastructure and technologies. It's called rare earth, for a reason. And by 2030, it'll be called scarce earth. Imagine the price hikes, the land grabs, even the wars over these materials. Imagine the global control countries with huge land masses like China and Russia will actually have. And the environmental impact is devastating, of course, because communities are uprooted, water courses contaminated, and ecosystems destroyed, all to mine these scarce so-called green resources. Now, none of this sounds very green or very secure to me. And then there's the physical infrastructure of the battery plant. We're still imagining, by the way, that we've fought and paid our way to get the rare earth materials, and we're still imagining the Isle of Man is an enormous gigafactory. And we're imagining they've all manufactured them at this point. Well, how many storage plants would we need in the UK? And how big would they be? Well, we'd need to probably store 3 days' worth of energy, right? And it would cover tens of thousands of acres of land. London, your Hyde Park, it's a battery pack. And then there's the security risk. Imagine these massive battery storage sites as prime targets. In a world where energy is everything, these sites will be very vulnerable to attack, whether by external forces or internal threats. One hit on a major storage site could black out the entire country for weeks. We're looking at covering large areas of our greenbelt land that otherwise would be used for agriculture, recreation, conservation. Oh, well, that's if we haven't turned it all into solar farms or data centers or carbon capture machines. I'm not even joking. This is what we're doing in our land. And that means trading food security for energy storage. And given our reliance on imports, this would create even more issues down the line. Your government is prepared to sacrifice farmland, risking food shortages to make space for battery storage without the batteries. One of the government's big selling points of this green energy is supposed to be job creation, but battery storage projects don't create jobs either, except on the Isle of Man, because they're making batteries. Most of the work is in the initial construction phase, and after that, these storage facilities are largely automated, meaning minimal staff required. So we're not seeing significant returns on investment in terms of employment either. In fact, the only people profiting are the big corporations and the banks, not the general public. And people are told that these projects are for the greater good. But the profits are concentrated in the hands of the few. They're not being shared out with the general public. And historically, battery storage isn't a new concept. It's been considered and dismissed since the early days of renewable energy. We've always known that technology was completely limited, yet some of the largest companies backing battery storage are closely tied with organizations like the World Economic Forum and the UN and their Agenda 30. We do not have the technology yet to even consider battery storage for the whole country in 7 years. Now, I'm not saying humans aren't brilliant. We are, and we will find solutions eventually. We don't have them yet. Your government wants to throw us all out of a plane before we've invented the parachute in the hope that someone will hurry up and invent the parachute, test it, manufacture it, and hand it out to you lot before we hit the ground. Why are they pushing it so urgently? Why is this happening? What's it being driven by? Because it certainly isn't environmental concerns. Well, it's being driven by Agenda 30. The WEF and all of their businesses have heavily invested in this narrative. And it's a narrative that can't possibly be executed. It's doomed to fail. But not before, of course, they've accumulated billions in profits from failed projects from governments like ours. And it's not just the UK that's as stupid as this, because take Bonkers Canada, for example. Their government invested heavily in battery storage. One of them cost $1 billion. Well, their costs have skyrocketed and they have little to show in terms of energy security. Even in the US, Tesla's famous battery projects aren't performing at the level predicted, with not only production and capacity challenges, but also from the risk of fire. And of course, the enormous cost of maintenance. And in Australia, well, their Tesla big battery was celebrated as a breakthrough. And yeah, it's been partially successful locally, but their costs are far higher than anticipated, and it's fighting with the grid for stability. I haven't even talked about our ancient falling apart grid. See, China too is investing massively in battery technology, but even with their scale and resources, they're struggling too. Even with their enormous resource of land, they're struggling. So if they're struggling, how can Ed Miliband, in his wildest dreams, believe we can beat China at their own game? See, I'd really prefer him not to gamble the house on who has the biggest wallet, because it isn't us. Seriously, guys, we need a new plan, because this one absolutely sucks. At the end of the day, battery storage is not the answer. And if the figures here for just 1 day's storage, imagine how much they're going to end up actually being. And don't forget, that storage doesn't last long. It depletes. Our sun doesn't always shine. Our wind doesn't always blow. This is not a realistic energy policy. We need one that at least gives us some financial security, not throwing us into bed with people we'll never be able to pay back. Relying on batteries in this kind of format to meet renewable energy goals is an ideological, ridiculous fairy tale. And if this is all true, where do we go from here? Well, we're going to have to start demanding some answers. We need to start asking hard questions. And so do the mainstream media, because if we go down this road, we're simply on a highway to bankruptcy, facing a 1920s-style depression with no way out. We won't to become energy independent at all. We'll just be shafted and cold. We'll be a third world country living with intermittent energy, with nothing left but debt, dependency, and a future dictated to by banks and corporations that we're entirely beholden to. And that's all a bit scary, isn't it? But you see, long before we get to that breaking point, we'll have realized this is a gigantic con, and we'll have pulled back from the brink of self-destruction. But not before, of course, we have spent those hundreds of billions of taxpayers' money on the emperor's new clothes. What I'm really saying is, don't let the propaganda blind you to the terrifying reality behind the amount of money we're about to spend on a failure. I just don't want you to do that. Anyway, that's batteries for you. Let me know what you think in the comments. What ideas do you have? How are you going to save us from this madness? Come on. We need to keep asking questions, because in the end, it's the only thing that's going to save us. Thank you for joining me today on the battery bullshit at If This Is True. Till next time.